All right, hello everyone. My name is Cenk Baykal and I'm a computer science and math major here. And today I'll be presenting design optimization algorithms for concentric tube robots as the subject of my honors thesis. And I want to acknowledge Professor Ron Alterovitz, my advisor, and close collaborator Luis Torres, who's a graduate student, for their invaluable advising and help. And my project can actually be seen as a direct extension of Luis's work. So before delving into design optimization algorithms, we might want to consider what a concentric tube robot is and why we should use it in the first place. So the motivation for these robots comes predominantly from the fact that traditional surgical tools are typically straight-line devices, meaning that they're limited to straight-line trajectories. And this straight-line limitation has some severe implications during surgery. For instance, for traveling to clinical sites in tight spaces, these devices cannot travel curved paths, and this may lead into some invasiveness of nearby anatomical structures. In other cases, the use of these devices may render the operation to be inoperable, so the patient cannot be operated given the current surgical tools. So what we really need is some way or some tool that can curve around anatomical structures to reach targets in tight spaces. And this is exactly the premise of concentric tube medical robots, as you can see here. These robots are composed of thin, pre-curved and customizable tubes. Here's a depiction of a concentric tube robot in comparison to a penny. And in that animation, we can see a robot reaching the pituitary gland through an endonasal procedure. So in contrast to existing methods, for instance, in reaching pituitary gland, the straight-line devices may be unable to reach the clinical goal region, or even worse, may damage vital anatomical structures nearby. But in the case of a concentric tube robot, these robots can actually just simply curve around these anatomical structures in a minimally invasive way and get to the pituitary gland where tumors may commonly arise. And the application of these robots is not limited to neurosurgical scenarios, but also can be extended to lung operations. For instance, examining lung nodules that may be cancers for early stage lung cancer diagnosis.
Why is it called concentric tube?
Because I'll get that in a second.
Okay.
So these robots sound pretty cool, but we might want to know how they really work. So these robots are built from these concentric tubes.
Okay.
In here we have 3 tubes. And when put together appropriately, the robot may look something like this. And during a surgery, the physician may want to move this robot. And moving this robot is enabled by rotating and translating each one of these tubes. So as you can see here, each tube has a theta and L parameter. And you may presumably expect that once these robots are translated and once the tubes are translated and rotated, the robot may have some unintuitive motion. So in this animation, you can see the tentacle-like motion of the robot, which is quite complicated and unintuitive. And I want to emphasize that just modeling these robots computationally has been an area of intense research, and computational methods are very computationally expensive as well. And this example also highlights the fact that the physical specifications of the tubes that are seen here have a severe impact on the shapes that the robot can assume, and hence the regions that the robot can reach in a surgical procedure. So this highlights the importance of robot design. And a robot design is just a set of parameters that denote the curvature, straight length, and curve length of each of the robot's tubes. So in here you can see a straight length, curve length, and the curvature. We have 3 parameters for each tube for a total of 9 parameters for a 3-tube robot. And as mentioned before, the design matters significantly. So on the left we can see a bad design, but on the right it is a great design for this procedure. And we can see that the curvatures allow the design on the right to reach this goal, whereas the one on the left cannot reach the goal without colliding with this obstacle here. So this motivates the need for design optimization algorithms that are able to output these design parameters that I mentioned on not only an application-specific basis, meaning the goal can change, the goal region can change within the patient's anatomy, but the patient's anatomy is going to be different for each patient. So one design that works for one patient may not work for another one. So we want to construct an algorithm or develop an algorithm that can optimize the design of a robot on an application and patient-specific basis. And more formally, the inputs that we're given are patient's anatomy, because the patient's anatomy matters, and physician-specified goal region. Patient's anatomy can be obtained by a CT scan or MRI, and the physician-specified goal region could be represented as a set of cubes. And the output of our algorithm would not be the design, but the optimal design parameters under which the robot's reachability to goal is maximized. So I just want to reiterate that the design parameters are the straight lengths, the curved lengths, and the curvatures of each of the robot's tubes. So as an example clinical application, we can consider the lung scenario in which the robot is maneuvering around the lung to inspect peripheral nodules within the lung to see whether they're cancerous. And this is very useful for early stage lung cancer diagnosis. So as mentioned before, we can obtain this image from a medical image, CT scan or MRI, and the robot would be deployed from here at the base of the what's called primary bronchi. And as you can see, as the robot maneuvers around the right lung, which is to your left, there are arteries, veins, and bronchioles that it must avoid. These are vital anatomical structures, and we want to make sure that the robot does not collide with them. So another input that I mentioned was the clinical goal region, and here's a depiction of what a goal region could look like. So within the anatomy, we can have a set of cubes. So in this case, we have 4 cubes, and you can also see in the image that the green sphere denotes the tip position of the robot. We can see that under this design, the robot can reach one of the cubes, but the question can be, is there a design such that under this design, the robot can reach all of the cubes, which may be necessary for a successful clinical procedure. So the clinical workflow that we envision is that I want to emphasize that our design and optimization algorithm runs on the preoperative phase, by the way. So the inputs are medical image data and the clinical goal region that I just mentioned. And this would be fed into our design optimization algorithm that would compute the curvatures, the straight lengths, and others. And the physical creation of the robot would take place after these optimal parameters are generated. And once the robot is constructed, it can be used in the operative phase during the clinical procedure. And I won't get too much into that, but if you're interested, you can talk to Luis. He's doing some really cool work there. So this may seem like a typical optimization challenge, and you may be tempted to say, well, why don't you just apply an off-the-shelf optimization algorithm to quickly solve this problem? Well, it turns out there are some severe or big challenges here. So in this picture, we can see that the robot is able to reach one of these cubes. But in representing this picture, we had to know what the shape of the robot looked like. And as I mentioned before, accurate kinematic modeling is very intensive. Just knowing the shape of the robot, given some rotations and translation of each cube, is very difficult and computationally intensive. And another factor is that we see that the robot is able to reach one of these points, or one of these cubes, but can it reach the other 3? So that question alone is fundamentally a motion planning problem. And motion planning problem in general, is known to be p-space hard. If you're familiar with NP hard, it's a class of problems that's actually harder than NP. So there are no efficient algorithms exist for motion planning. And the state-of-the-art motion planning algorithms are usually randomized and iterative motion planning algorithms, so that we can only obtain approximations of the voxels or the cubes that the robot can reach. So let's say we consider one design, such as this one. How can we evaluate its quality? Evaluating a design basically entails asking the question of, under this design, what percentage of the goal cubes can the robot reach? And as I mentioned before in the picture, we had the robot reaching 1 cube. So 1 out of 4, that's 25%, but can it reach 100%? And as I mentioned before, this is fundamentally a motion planning problem, for which we use an algorithm called rapidly exploring random trees. And it's an iterative algorithm that provides an approximation of the reachable goal percentage. And we can see that in this figure, this is a 2D example of the RT algorithm in action. And it starts from a start point and iteratively explores the space. And we can see that as more time is allotted, the algorithm can explore the space more sufficiently. But the important take-home message from here is that the algorithm provides an approximation. It's a probabilistic and iterative algorithm. So since evaluating a design is so computationally intensive, we want to cleverly sample designs rather than just sampling random ones. And for cleverly sampling designs, we use the global optimization algorithm called adaptive simulated annealing. And in this animation, you can see the ASA algorithm in action. The ASA algorithm starts with a high temperature at first, and that allows the algorithm to sufficiently explore the design space in this case. And then finally, as the temperature is decreased, the algorithm converges to a globally optimal value. In that case, that global max over there. And it also has some other favorable algorithmic properties that allow us to conclude some other advantageous properties of our algorithm. So speaking of which, our algorithm, we conducted some mathematical analysis and proved that our algorithm is asymptotically optimal in the sense that as the number of iterations or the computation time that is given to our design optimization algorithm extensively approaches infinity, the optimal design or the design generated by our algorithm converges in probability to the globally optimal design. And I want to mention that the current state-of-the-art optimization algorithms do not make any of these asymptotic optimality claims and do not have any of these bounds on the generated output. And empirically, we also show through experiments that our algorithm generates and converges to higher quality designs in comparison to current state-of-the-art algorithms. So I mentioned the lung scenario before, and so we use our algorithm and compared it with other algorithms to see whether does our algorithm really generate better designs in a shorter amount of time. And here are the results. In red, you can see our algorithm, and in cyan, green, and blue, respectively, are other algorithms. And as we can see, after around 6 hours of computation time, our algorithm is able to find a design that can reach 93% of the goal region. And in comparison to other designs, this reachability percentage is much higher. And you can also see the favorable asymptotic properties of our algorithm as our algorithm slowly starts to converge to 100% reachable goal region. So in this regard, when we were doing our work on single design, we noticed that some designs were inherently better at reaching some certain regions better than others. So to illustrate this property, on the left here you can see designs with high curvature and relatively small length, reaching points within the anatomy. And these points and these regions are fundamentally distinct and different from the ones that a design with longer lengths and lower curvatures can reach, which is on the right. So we conjectured that using multiple designs can actually result in higher percentages in reachability. So if you wanted to reach the entire lung, we could use multiple designs in conjunction in doing so. So here's a point cloud representation to really drive the idea that some designs are really better than others in reaching some certain regions. And here this is a point cloud representation conveying the reachable goal points by design red, which is one design, and another design, let's say design green. And as you can see, the red design is able to reach points that are closer to the lung, closer to the heart, whereas the green design may be better at reaching top regions of the lung. So this really kind of supports our conjecture that some designs are inherently better in reaching some certain regions than others. And here are some quantitative results to prove this conjecture, or in support of this conjecture. We can see that in the red, one design after many hours of computation was only able to reach a little under 70% of the lung, whereas if we use six designs in conjunction, we can reach 97% of the lung. So applying the same method that I mentioned before of adaptive simulated annealing and the RRT algorithm, we wanted to solve the problem of optimizing a multiple designs, or a set of designs. So one immediate problem objective was to maximize the reachable goal percentage by a set of designs. So we can say, rather than asking the question of can we find a single design that can maximize the reachable goal percentage, we can look at multiple designs. And another question that we asked was, can we generate a minimal set of designs that can reach a specified threshold? So if we were to ask the question of what is the minimum number of designs that is needed to reach 95% of the lung, could we generate this set? So we applied our algorithms to this scenario as well. So and compared it to with prior work. So in this case, our algorithm is highlighted in blue, and we can see that within the same amount of time, our algorithm is able to find, in this case, a set of 2 designs that is able to reach 80% of the entire lung, and which is much greater than that of other design optimization algorithms. And here are the results for optimizing or minimizing the number of designs required to reach 95% of the lung. So after 3 hours of computation time, our algorithm was able to find, on average, 5.5, a design set of size 5.5 designs that is able to reach 95% of the lung. So just to conclude, concentric tube robots are a new type of robot that have potential to enable novel and minimally invasive surgical procedures. We developed novel algorithms to optimize the design of a single and a set of robots. And we also conducted mathematical analysis establishing some favorable properties of our methods and empirically showed that our method was able to find a design that is superior or with higher quality in a shorter amount of time. So I just want to acknowledge my advisor on Alterovitz, Luis, and Chris, and some monetary sources. So thank you.
Questions?
So would any of these models account for the natural variations that you probably have in lungs and tubes and such? So I mean, you know, I'm assuming if these tubes are going to be reaching into someone's lungs and it's not going to be a perfectly stable model, like there's going to be a lot of moving around there. Do they account for that?
So that's actually a great question. Well, I think what you're mentioning is dynamic obstacles. For instance, when someone's breathing, the lung changes, or the heart beating, for example. So that's a great question. In this case, we assume static obstacles, but dynamic obstacles is something of future work. And there's also some ways of deployment that account for this breathing. So you can only deploy the robot, for instance, at certain intervals of time so that you don't collide with a rapidly expanding lung or something of that sort.
How different are patients in practice for this sort of thing? Like if you had to design a robot for you and I had to get the same thing done, like sample region,
Yeah.
how similar might they be?
So that's a great question. As I mentioned, our design optimization algorithm takes into account the anatomy of a patient. But and as you clearly pointed out, the anatomy can be different between a patient. But for instance, if you consider the lungs of a child, that will be much different than the lungs of a grown person. So there might be some severe variation, but we haven't really looked into how much variation there really is. But we anticipate, due to variances in just humans in general, the anatomy could be quite different. Hence the application and patient-specific part of our optimization. Right, there's a question like that.
Two questions. So first, what type of information do you actually get after you reach the goal? And then second is, how do you know where the goal is? Are you going to, is the tube going to search the entire lung for the goal, or? Because the CT scan will not tell you where your goal is, right?
Right. So as I mentioned here, this goal region is actually just a set of cubes that is actually defined by the physician. So the physician would actually tell.
So that's the question for the physician then.
Right. So that's actually considered an input to our algorithm. So one clinical goal region is specified, and as you can see, as you can imagine, if the nodule is in a different place, depending on the application that you're looking at, the physician can specify in terms of cubes or other voxels where the nodule is, and that's input to our algorithm.
So what type of information is the tube transmitting?
The tube?
The robot,
Um,
after it reaches the goal?
Oh, after it. So this is all in simulation right now. But what would happen is, for instance, in this picture, we can see that that cube that is reached is marked as blue. So it's marked as reached. So at the end of the evaluation of this design, we would look at all of the reached cubes and then take a fraction. For instance, there are 4 cubes here. If the robot reaches 3 of them, that yields a 75% reachable goal percentage rate.
Was your question from a medical point of view, what happened when you got there?
I was just very curious, like the type of information would be like light or like what type of signal, electromagnetic.
Is there a camera at the tip, or is it taking a biopsy, or? I think that's really her kind of question. Is what's being transmitted
Yeah,
through the
right.
tube.
during the design optimization procedure?
No, once it's in.
Yeah, is there a camera on the end of the tube? for
Well,
the
it can-
doctor, or-
Well, it can be, anything that, it could be something, a cutting tool for a biopsy or some incision, or so, but during the so during the operation, it can be really anything that the physician wants, but
Yeah, that's not the focus of your research, I'm sorry.
right, no, that's fine, that's a great question. Well, yeah, it can be a cutting tool, it can be a camera, it could be something to biopsy these nodules with.
Any more questions?